My name is Sally Green, and I'm 31. If you'd asked me a few years ago what home sounded like, I would have said push notifications at 2 a.m. and the rinse cycle drone of office air conditioning. Now, home sounds like wind chimes, my grandmother's, singing above a sun-faded porch 2 hours from the city, where the ocean doesn't ask for anything except that you listen. 2 summers ago, Grandma died after a long battle with cancer. In the quiet after the funeral, the attorney read the will. My father, David, got her main house upstate. My brother Michael received cash equal to the value of her beach cottage. And I, somehow, got the cottage itself. I didn't argue. None of us did. The money made sense for Michael and his growing family. The big house made sense for Dad, who needs square footage to store his opinions. The cottage made sense for me because Grandma had pressed it into my hands long before paper did. The decades of surf wax and coffee stains and late-night talks on the deck were a deed in their own right. The legal deed came with a letter she'd handwritten. I keep it in my nightstand. "You breathe easier here, Sal," she wrote. She always shortened my name when she wanted me to listen. Let the ocean reduce the noise. Keep a place in this world where you don't have to audition. I think about that sentence every time I turn the key. The house isn't a magazine spread. It's a 1960s three-bed that leans a little west when storms push in. The windows stick when you're in a hurry, but glide open when you're not. The coffee maker only works if you nudge it like a stubborn friend. I repaint trim with podcasts on. I scrub the deck until the slats flash a pale, weathered grin. I keep her wind chimes right where they've always been, above the front steps. So the doorbell is a music cue, not a buzzer. Work is relentless. 60 to 70 hours. Tech product launches that pretend time is a toy. The cottage is where I unlearn the noise. I surf when the tide is kind. I read when the fog sits low. I sit and count breathing as if it were a valuable thing that could run out. Sometimes my boyfriend, Evan, comes with me. He'll fall asleep after dinner, halfway through a movie with subtitles, and wake up at dawn saying, "I didn't snore, right?" He did. It's part of the soundtrack now. 6 months ago, my father started making comments. "A beautiful house should be used efficiently," he said, carving pot roast as if he were also carving policy. 3 bedrooms for one person, Sally? Feels excessive. I smiled, because a smile is easier than a fight. "I'm there when I can be," I said. Maintenance is a love language. 3 months ago, Michael joined the chorus. "The kids are cramped," he said, listing school rankings on his phone with the zeal of a realtor. "Sea air would be great for Christopher's asthma." It was the first I'd heard of Christopher having asthma. Jennifer, my sister-in-law, nodded in CEO sympathy. We want what's best for them. There are sentences so weaponized you can barely see the blade. Then the dinner happened, our monthly gathering at my parents' place. Dad cleared his throat the way he does when a meeting is about to become an ambush. "Family resources should serve the family," he began, and I remembered how he used to say synergy in the 2008 recession like it was an incantation. Your grandmother couldn't have foreseen current needs. We propose 2 options. You gift the cottage to your brother's family or sell at a family discount, say 40% under market. "Why can't Michael buy a place near the coast?" I asked. "He had the cash." Jennifer laughed lightly, like a host on a daytime show. "Oh, that's been invested in the family. Our kitchen remodel and a boat that retains value." The boat gets sunburned twice a year. I told them Grandma's letter mattered. I told them the house wasn't empty. It was breathing for me when I forgot to. I offered to read the letter, but stopped. Some words are so intimate they become fragile when spoken near people who might drop them. Dad's reply sliced. "Your grandmother was sentimental at the end. We have to think rationally now." Michael added, "You use it as a single woman's weekend pad. We'd make it a real home." My mother, Barbara, stayed quiet until the plates were stacked. In the kitchen, she said, "Maybe a timeshare arrangement? Summer months with the kids?" She said summer like it wasn't the only season the ocean asked for our full attention. I told her summer was when I needed it most. She sighed. "You're putting me in an impossible position." The drive home was quiet until Evan cleared his throat. "Don't hate me for this, but is there any version where you share certain weeks? Not because they deserve it, because you might deserve peace." I stared out at the highway, lights smearing like a watercolor I didn't want. Maybe, I said, which felt like a betrayal of Grandma and also a way to keep oxygen moving. Evan put his hand on mine. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed every salt-bright morning on the deck. Every evening, the house held me together when work tried to pull me thin. I thought of Grandma's hands folding towels warm from the line, her laugh when I wiped out on a wave and came up spitting like a cat. The house is not a trophy. It's a lung. 2 weeks later, I left the office early, Friday, 2 p.m., the sky a pale linen, and headed for the coast. The wind picked up as I turned onto the road that curves like a question mark along the dunes. I reached for the gate remote and paused. My parking spot, the shade under Grandma's old oak, was blocked by my father's BMW, Michael's SUV, and Jennifer's sedan. The front door was open. The wind chimes were talking too fast. Inside, my father sat at the dining table with papers spread out as if the house were a conference room he'd booked. Michael had a beer from my fridge. Jennifer was cooking, my pans, her spices. Cartoon laughter hit the ceiling like ping-pong balls. My nephew sprinted past me holding one of Grandma's hand-painted shells. "Aunt Sal! Daddy says this is my room!" He pointed at the guest room where my desk faces the horizon, the place where I remember that beyond deadlines is a line where the sky meets water and refuses to care about our meetings. Dad looked up slowly, like I was late to something he'd scheduled. "Sally, good. We're having a family meeting about the cottage. Neutral ground is best. Neutral in my house." Jennifer turned, smiling without warmth. "Tacos? We brought better cumin than you keep." Her eyes flicked to my spice rack like an audit. "You all need to leave," I said. I felt very calm, as if my bones had decided panic was a waste. "This is trespassing." Michael laughed. "Trespassing? We're family." "I changed the locks 3 weeks ago," I said. "How did you get in?" Dad shifted in his chair. "Property management had an old key on file. I explained the situation. Family access? And they understood." He said understood like he'd handed them the dictionary. In the hallway, a notebook lay open with sketches. Toy storage, where Grandma's bookshelves stand. Plastic gates, where the stairs breathe. On my dresser, beside a photo of Grandma and me, her arm around my shoulders, the day I graduated, someone had placed a sticky note. "Move to garage." "You have 1 hour to leave," I said, "or I'm calling the police." Dad stood, drawing himself to his fullest height. "You would call the police on your own family? Your grandmother would be ashamed. She valued family." "She valued respect," I said, the words steady as a pylon in water. "That's why she gave this to me." Jennifer began to cry. Michael called me selfish, said I'd die alone with a houseplant for an heir. My mother's voice appeared on speaker from Dad's phone, tinny and pleading. In my bedroom, Michael was measuring the wall where my bed sits, as if my life were chalk on a contractor's floor. I called the police. They came. I showed the deed. I showed the text from 3 weeks ago. "No one is allowed here without my permission." The officers told them to leave. On their way out, Jennifer informed the kids, loud enough for the ocean to hear, that some people value things over family. Christopher cried. I held it together until the wind chimes fell quiet behind the closed door. That night, I installed smart locks. Unique codes I can kill from my phone. Cameras watch the angles the old ones didn't. Evan held the ladder and said nothing unless I needed a hand. When we were done, the house exhaled. I could hear it in the chimes, one clear note, then another, like a warning on the air. I wish I could tell you that was the worst of it. It was only the first crack. Out beyond the sandbar, a wave was pulling its whole body together, gathering for the break. I told myself that weekend was an anomaly, that the police visit had driven the point home, but deep down, I knew my father too well. He never truly loses. He just waits, recalculates, and returns with paperwork. For a few quiet weeks, the house exhaled with me again. I spent my evenings on the deck, listening to the same wind chimes Grandma hung half a century ago. Sometimes I'd hear them at night, even through closed windows, whispering like warnings carried on the tide. Then the text started. First from Mom. "Maybe you overreacted, sweetheart. You know your father meant well." Then from Michael. "Dad says you've locked everyone out. That's not what Grandma would have wanted." And finally, from an unknown number that turned out to be Jennifer. "Just so you know, we're contacting someone from the local council about property access rights for family members. Don't make this uglier than it has to be. I didn't respond to any of them. I sent screenshots to my lawyer, who assured me they had no standing to touch the property. Still, I couldn't shake the crawling feeling that something was coming. Evan noticed the tension in my shoulders one night as we were watching a movie. "You keep checking your phone," he said softly. "I just have this feeling," I whispered. "Like they're circling." He squeezed my hand. "Then circle tighter around yourself. Don't let them in." It was almost poetic advice. Too bad reality prefers chaos. 2 weeks later, chaos showed up, with my family's cars in the driveway again. I'd left work early that Friday. The week had been brutal. 3 deadlines, 2 canceled meetings, 1 public meltdown from my supervisor. So I decided to reclaim peace. I stopped by the bakery on the coastal road, picked up a cinnamon latte and a small box of lemon scones. The ocean glittered ahead, the kind of silver blue that looks too calm to be real. But when I turned onto my street, my chest locked. Dad's BMW, Michael's SUV, Jennifer's sedan. Again. My stomach twisted as I parked behind them. I checked my cameras from the app. The last footage was from 11:45 a.m. My father walking toward the porch with a clipboard in hand, Michael behind him carrying a box. The footage cut off shortly after. I stepped out of the car, heart pounding. From inside the cottage came voices, laughter, the clinking of dishes. I opened the door. There they were, again, as if nothing had happened weeks ago. Dad sat at the table, papers spread like a courtroom exhibit. Michael and Jennifer were moving things around the living room. The kids ran through the hallway, toys scattered like confetti. "Unbelievable," I breathed. Dad looked up, calm as a saint. "Sally, we're having another discussion. Don't worry, this time we're handling things more formally." "Formally?" I echoed. "You broke into my house again." "Not quite," Jennifer said without looking up from her notebook. "Your father had a key from the management company, so technically not a break-in." My hands trembled. That company didn't have permission anymore. Dad frowned, pretending patience. "I've already explained. They understand family matters take precedence. You'll thank us later once this is settled." "Settled?" I repeated, trying to steady my breath. "By what logic?" Michael straightened, that familiar smirk painted across his face. "By the logic that we're making this house useful. You're wasting it, Sal. You come here, what, 2 weekends a month? We could live here full time. The kids could have a real childhood. Beaches, friends, normalcy." Jennifer added, "You work too much. You don't even need this house. Let it serve a purpose." I was shaking, not from fear, from fury. "You don't get to define purpose for me." Dad rose, palms raised. "No one's trying to take it away. We're trying to share." "Share?" I pointed toward the guest room. "You've already moved my desk. You've touched my things. You're—" My voice broke, because in that room, my brother was holding a measuring tape again. Measuring. Planning. On the wall, someone had stuck a note. "Kids' room. Repaint blue." I could barely see straight. "Everyone out. Now. You have 60 seconds before I call the police." Michael chuckled, stepping closer. "You can't keep doing this, Sal. You think the cops are your personal security guards?" "I think they enforce the law," I said coldly, unlocking my phone. Dad sighed. "This is embarrassing. For you." That's when my phone buzzed. An alert from the camera system. Notification. Code reset attempt detected. They had tried to disable the locks. I pressed the emergency call shortcut. "Dispatch, this is Sally Green. My family is trespassing on my private property. They've gained illegal access through a third party. I need officers sent immediately." The air went still. Even the kids quieted, sensing danger in adult silence. Dad muttered, "You're making a scene." Michael hissed, "Unbelievable." Jennifer began that theatrical cry again, murmuring, "You're traumatizing the children." When the police arrived, I showed them the footage from my app. My father entering with his old key, time-stamped hours before. The officers looked at Dad. "Sir, you were previously warned. You can't enter without the owner's consent." Dad's jaw twitched. "This is a family misunderstanding." "It's trespassing," one officer said flatly. "You'll need to leave immediately." Michael muttered curses under his breath as they packed up. Jennifer clutched her kids, whispering loud enough for me to hear. "Some people just don't know the meaning of family." Dad paused by the door. "You think you've won, Sally, but this isn't over." Then they left, leaving muddy footprints, half-cooked food on the stove, and silence that felt radioactive. When the door shut, I slid down against it, shaking. I could smell burnt tortillas and ocean salt. My grandmother's wind chimes clanged once outside, hard, like the sky itself had snapped. Evan came the next morning after I called him in tears. He helped me pack up the kitchen and clean the floors. While we worked, he found something near the front door, a printed real estate brochure. Someone had circled a listing description in red ink. Ideal for family living, child-safe environment, room for renovation. Michael's handwriting. Evan looked at me, eyes dark. They're planning something bigger. I know, I said quietly. And next time, they won't sneak in through the front. That evening, I emailed my lawyer. We upgraded security again. Cameras facing every angle, motion sensors linked directly to local police. But even with every precaution, a truth lingered like salt under skin. You can fortify walls all you want, but sometimes the invasion comes disguised as love. 3 weeks later, it happened. The moment my nightmares had been rehearsing for. It was a Friday, early afternoon, when I decided to leave the office after a crushing meeting. I wanted salt air, not fluorescent light. I didn't even tell Evan I was going. I just needed to breathe again. The entire drive down, I tried to convince myself the worst was over. The locks were changed. The cameras were live. The cease and desist letter had been delivered by my lawyer and signed for by both my father and Michael. Legally, they had no ground left to stand on. But my gut, that low, old ache, told me peace was temporary. As the coast came into view, sunlight broke through the fog like a blade. I remember thinking it looked like a good omen. I was wrong. Half a mile from my turnoff, I saw it, a moving truck parked at the edge of my street. My heart skipped. Then I saw the rest. My father's BMW, Michael's SUV, 2 other sedans I didn't recognize. I pulled over a few houses away and opened my phone. My security app showed nothing. The cameras were offline. They'd found a way around the system, the beachside access, where my Wi-Fi signal faded behind the dunes. My fingers shook as I started recording video on my phone. Document everything, my lawyer had said. The camera doesn't panic. People do. I walked toward my cottage, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The front door was wide open, not unlocked, open. Boxes stacked on the porch, labeled in Michael's handwriting, kids' toys, kitchenware, master bedroom. Inside, I heard laughter, strangers' voices. I stepped through my own doorway and froze. The living room was unrecognizable, my couch gone. In its place, Michael and Jennifer's gray sectional, Grandma's antique coffee table, the one she'd polished with lemon oil every summer, shoved against a wall. Plastic corner guards on every edge. My walls, the soft sage color I'd spent a weekend painting, were already marked with crayon scribbles. Jennifer was in the kitchen, humming, unpacking dishes that weren't mine. She looked up casually when she saw me. "Oh, Sally, we didn't think you'd be here until tonight." She smiled, that same saccharine smile she wore when she wanted to seem polite while cutting you in half. "Don't worry," she added. "We saved your bedroom for you. We thought you'd still want to visit on weekends." "Visit my own home." "Get out," I said quietly. Michael appeared from the back deck, wiping sweat from his forehead. He was assembling a playset on my deck. "Let's talk about this rationally," he said. "The kids are already enrolled in school. Their teachers are expecting them Monday. Moving again would be traumatic." "Moving again," I repeated. "You were never supposed to move here in the first place." Dad entered from the hallway, the clipboard still in his hand, like a weapon made of authority. "Sally, it's time to accept reality. You're a single woman with a demanding job. You barely use this house. Your brother has a family. Your grandmother would want—" "Don't you dare!" I cut him off. "Don't use her." "She told me herself," Dad continued coolly. "She hoped you'd grow up and share someday." "That's a lie," I said, voice trembling. "You were never even here those summers. You were too busy on business trips while Grandma raised both of us at the beach." Michael set down his wrench and stepped toward me. "You're overreacting. You've been selfish about this since day one. We've talked to lawyers. Dad's name is on a key record from before. That proves shared access. We're already here, Sal. You'll come around." I took a slow breath. "You forged something, didn't you?" Michael blinked, caught off guard. "What?" I turned toward one of the men carrying boxes through the door, movers in blue uniforms, confusion on their faces. "Can I see your work order?" I asked. The man hesitated, then handed me the clipboard. My signature was scrawled across the page, a signature that wasn't mine. "I didn't sign this," I said flatly. "You've been tricked." The mover's face paled. "We were told this was a family property transfer." They said everyone agreed. They lied, I said. You're moving me out of my own home. That's when I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Dad's composure cracked. Sally, don't be ridiculous. This is a family matter. No, I said, voice shaking. This is criminal. He reached out as if to grab my phone, but I stepped back. Touch me, and I'll add assault. I turned the speaker on so the operator could hear. This is Sally Green. My family has broken into my home and hired movers to remove my property. There are forged documents with my name on them. Michael's voice rose, desperate and angry. You're actually doing this? Calling the cops on us? On you, yes, I said. Jennifer started sobbing theatrically. You're making the children homeless. How can you do this to family? The operator's calm voice said, Stay on the line, ma'am. Officers are on the way. Dad muttered to Michael, Don't engage. We're establishing residency. Once we've lived here a week, she can't force us out without court action. My stomach dropped. They'd planned this. They'd researched loopholes. Residency? I echoed, incredulous. You broke in. There's video footage. Dad smirked. The property company verified I've had a key for years. No breaking required. I realized then this wasn't spontaneous. It was strategic. They'd coordinated everything. Legal bluffs, fake documents, emotional manipulation. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights filled the driveway. The officers entered carefully. Ma'am, can you show us documentation? I handed them the deed, Grandma's will, the cease and desist letters. Then I showed them the fake signature on the mover's form. The lead officer turned to Michael. Sir, this appears to be forgery. Michael's face flushed red. You don't understand. She's selfish. She's always been... The officer cut him off. You're done talking. Everyone needs to leave. Now. Jennifer scooped up the kids, still crying. Michael cursed under his breath, kicking a box on the way out. Dad's face was blank, but the fury in his eyes said everything. As they drove off, my nephew Christopher, the sweet, innocent boy who didn't deserve any of this, looked out the car window and shouted through tears, Aunt Sally, why are you taking our house? The question broke something in me. I couldn't even answer. When the sirens faded, the silence was unbearable. The house felt hollow, stripped. My furniture was back in place, but the air was wrong, violated. The movers stayed behind, apologizing profusely. One of them said, We'll testify if needed. This was messed up. I nodded numbly. Please send everything to my lawyer. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow felt like memory, every creak like intrusion. I packed a small bag and left for a hotel inland. From the balcony, I watched the ocean through the dark. It looked different now, not peaceful, but heavy, like it knew. Evan drove down the next morning. He found me on the balcony, eyes red, hands shaking. It's over, right? He asked. I shook my head slowly. No, this was just the rehearsal. The real performance comes next. I woke the next morning with my phone buzzing against the nightstand. 27 missed calls, a dozen voicemails. The first few were my mother, sobbing. The rest were relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all repeating the same message. You didn't have to call the cops. It's just property. Families should work things out privately. Privately. The word tasted like poison. I sent one text to my lawyer. They forged my signature. Let's move forward. That was the morning everything shifted from emotional warfare to legal battle. The legal line. By Monday, my lawyer had filed charges: forgery, trespassing, fraud, and attempted unlawful occupancy. We also filed for a restraining order against all three: my father, my brother, and Jennifer. The lawyer was calm, efficient, surgical. They'll panic, she said. People like this always do once the law replaces guilt as the consequence. She was right. Within days, Jennifer posted a long Facebook essay titled, When Family Betrays You for a House. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. Hundreds of sympathy emojis, people calling me cold, selfish, another childless millennial who doesn't understand family. Then came the messages, anonymous numbers, private accounts. Rot in your precious house, witch. Hope your ocean drowns you. I stopped checking my phone. Evan took it out of my hands one night. You're not reading any more of this, he said, scrolling, deleting. You're not feeding their circus. He meant well, but the circus had already spilled into my sleep. I kept dreaming of the wind chimes, clanging wildly, even when the air was still. The mother's apology. A week later, my aunt showed up at my door with a folded note. It's from your mother, she said softly. She didn't think you'd answer her calls. The letter was short, shaky handwriting, teardrops smudging the ink. I knew they were planning something, Sal. I didn't think they'd go that far. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I should have stopped them. Please don't shut me out. I didn't respond right away. The hurt was too raw. But I kept the letter on the counter, not as forgiveness, but as proof that someone had finally told the truth. The hearing. The day of the restraining order hearing, the courthouse smelled like dust and coffee. I sat beside my lawyer in a crisp gray suit I didn't feel worthy of wearing. Michael and Jennifer sat across the aisle, both dressed like victims. Jennifer clutched tissues she didn't use. My father stood behind them, expression unreadable, the kind of silence that used to make me feel small when I was a child. The judge reviewed the footage, the forged moving forms, the cease and desist letter. When the clip played, my father calmly instructing movers to put that bookshelf in the garage, the judge's eyebrows lifted. This appears to be a premeditated attempt at unlawful possession, she said. Frankly, Ms. Green, I'm astonished you remained as composed as you did. Jennifer broke first, whispering to her attorney, crying theatrically. Michael tried to speak, something about misunderstandings and family, but the judge cut him off. Sir, this isn't a family therapy session. This is a criminal matter. The restraining order was granted on the spot. They were forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me or the property. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Not peace yet, but the outline of it. Fallout. That night, my phone lit up again, but this time with messages of silence. No more calls, no more harassment. Word had spread through the extended family. Everyone suddenly remembered their neutrality. Funny how quickly morality fades when subpoenas appear. 2 days later, my mother called again. I let it go to voicemail, then listened as she whispered, I'm leaving your father. I can't keep defending what they did. I just want my daughter back. I cried then, not because it fixed anything, but because for the first time, she used the right word, defending. She finally understood that enabling wasn't love. The quiet return. Weeks passed. Evan and I drove back to the beach house to start repairing the damage. The air smelled of salt and paint thinner. I scrubbed the walls myself, repainted the scuffed hallway. Evan fixed the deck rail that Michael had dented with his tool bag. While cleaning out the shed, I found a small blue toy car, Christopher's. It was wedged between the boards. I sat down, the toy warm in my hand from the sun. For the first time since all this started, I didn't feel anger. I felt grief. Not for the adults who betrayed me, but for the kids who were lied to, used as props in their parents' play for control. That night, I told Evan I wanted to set up a small trust fund for them. Not for Michael or Jennifer, I clarified. For the children, when they're old enough to see things clearly. He nodded. That's the most you can do without reopening the wound. The neighbors speak. A few days later, my lawyer called with a surprise. The neighbor across the street came forward, she said. She has doorbell footage of the moving truck and audio of your father saying, once we're in, she can't get us out. That evidence strengthened the fraud case and dismantled the family's narrative in one line. Dad's attorney tried to negotiate a private settlement. I refused. We finished this publicly, I told my lawyer. I'm done with secrets. A new sound. Weeks later, as the season shifted and the sea turned gray again, I stood on the porch one morning listening to the wind chimes. They sounded different, not frantic or broken, but steady. Evan came out with coffee, leaning against the railing. You really think you can forgive them someday? He asked. I looked out at the horizon. Forgive? Maybe. Forget? Never. But I can live without flinching again. The waves rolled in slowly, unbothered by everything that had happened on land. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the ocean was warning me. It was just breathing, and maybe, finally, so was I. It's been 3 months since the restraining order was granted. 3 months since my father, my brother, and Jennifer last set foot anywhere near this coastline. And for the first time in years, silence feels like safety, not suspense. The court hearings wrapped faster than my lawyer expected. Michael took a plea deal. Probation, restitution, and mandatory community service. Jennifer tried to distance herself, saying she was just following her husband's lead. But the prosecutor showed footage of her directing movers through my kitchen, labeling my boxes storage. She cried in court, of course, but this time no one clapped for her performance. My father's case is still pending. His attorney keeps filing extensions, claiming health issues. I don't know if he's sick or just afraid of consequences for the first time in his life. I don't wish him ill, just distance. The civil suit for damages is ongoing, but my lawyer says we'll win easily. Apparently, the moving company handed over every document showing Michael forged my signature. They even filed a fraud complaint on their own. Every lie, every manipulation, every family meeting has unraveled in court like a bad script. Except this time, I got to write the ending. The aftermath. Mom moved in with my aunt upstate. She calls once a week, never to talk about them, just to ask how I'm sleeping, what book I'm reading, if the sea air still smells like Grandma's porch. It's awkward, gentle, and strangely healing. The extended family, those Facebook critics who called me greedy, they've gone silent now that they realize the full story. Funny how the outrage disappears when the facts go public. One cousin even sent me an apology text. Didn't know they forged your name? I'd have done the same thing. I didn't respond, but I saved it anyway. Reclaiming the cottage. Evan and I have spent every weekend here since the last hearing. We fixed the wall damage in the hallway. I repainted Grandma's sage green trim. The coffee maker, her stubborn relic, is still in its corner. And yes, it still needs a nudge before it brews. On one foggy morning, I unpacked the box that had held Grandma's letter, the one she wrote me when she left me this place. I read it aloud this time. Keep a place in this world where you don't have to audition. When I finished, I cried, not the broken kind, but the kind that rinses something clean. Evan walked in quietly and wrapped his arms around me. She knew you'd need this, he said softly. I nodded. She knew they'd try to take it too. He smiled a little. Then she left it to the only one strong enough to fight for it. That night, we lit candles on the deck. I placed Grandma's wind chimes back on their original hook, the one my father had bent trying to hang his clipboard there that day. The chimes sang, steady and full, and I swear the house itself seemed to exhale. A cleansing and a promise. The next morning, Evan brought sage, his idea. You said it once felt tainted, he reminded me. Let's change that. So we did. We walked room to room, waving the smoke gently, the air swirling between us. The house felt lighter by the time we finished. Afterward, we sat on the porch steps, the sea wind tousling our hair. This house isn't haunted anymore, I said. He grinned. No ghosts, just memories. I thought about that for a moment. Good, because I plan to make new ones. He squeezed my hand. We already are. The letter I never sent. Later that week, I began journaling. Letters addressed to Grandma, written at sunrise while the tide rolled in. I told her everything. The betrayal, the break-ins, the courtroom, the exhaustion, the small mercies. I told her about finding Christopher's toy car under the deck and setting up a trust for him and Emma, to be given to them when they're old enough to know the truth. And I told her about peace, how it isn't loud or triumphant, but quiet, like the sound of waves against wood, the final reflection. Sometimes people message me, old friends, coworkers who saw the story online. They ask how I found the courage to stand up to my family. I tell them the truth. I didn't feel brave. I felt cornered. I just refused to live small to keep other people comfortable. Family isn't about shared DNA. It's about shared respect. If someone tramples your boundaries, manipulates your kindness, or rewrites your story to justify their greed, then they're not family. They're strangers wearing familiar faces. Grandma's cottage taught me that boundaries are not walls. They're doors that stay locked until someone knocks with love, not entitlement. And now, as the sun dips low across the ocean and the chimes sing in that same timeless rhythm, I realize this house isn't just mine legally, it's mine spiritually. The peace here doesn't ask for permission anymore. It simply exists. I pour 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for her, and whisper toward the sea. Thank you, Grandma. You were right. This place really is where I remember who I am. The wind chimes ring once, clear, bright, and whole.